Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Saturday Morning D&D Show. My name is Jordan, with a silent PH in the middle. And I'm joined this week by a very special co-host, Sir Lucien, from Sir Lucien Gaming. Sir Lucien, how are you?
I want to talk really loud, but they're probably adjusting their volume to try to figure out what you're
really,
doing. And then
really
if I
nice
came in
to
really
hear you.
bombastic, they'd be like, no.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Super excited to have you here on this fine Saturday morning.
Welcome. Let's get some more energy going on here.
Heck yeah.
Come on.
Talking about games, drinking coffee, cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria.
It's
all over the place. What are we doing?
Favorite Ghostbusters line ever.
Yeah. That movie's just quotable. We were just talking about Ghostbusters before the show started, but unrelated. I say that line a lot because it's really good.
Yeah. It's a movie I can watch and probably mumble every single line through the whole thing because I've seen it so many times. I love it.
So we talked, this is unrelated, but
unrelated.
As far as Ghostbusters, I love the first one.
Yeah.
And it's because I saw the first one first, and it's just a great movie, and it's Ghostbusters. My wife saw Ghostbusters 2 first. Oh. And so when she has like nostalgia memories, it's always Ghostbuster 2. And she's just like, well, Ghostbuster 1 doesn't have baby Oscar. Like, that's like the best part, where he's just like, can you put the baby down? And he goes to him and goes, you're too short. Your belly button sticks out, and you're a terrible burden on your poor mother. Like, those are quality jokes. And I was like, classic. No, it's not a bad movie. It's just funny that like she always thinks of Vigo, the Carpathian, and I always think of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
Yeah,
it's quality.
That is true. Both are really good, though. Actually,
no, they are.
I don't even know if I could pick between the two. I love them so much. Yeah.
Super fun, and I'm surprised there's not a Ghostbusters RPG now. There probably will be in the next.
Used to be
5
video
years.
games. Remember, I think Nintendo had a Ghostbusters game. Couple of them, one or
they
two.
made a Ghostbusters PC game that I played through.
Oh.
And I think it used the voices of all the actors. This is before Harold Ramis died, and it's pretty good. It's super funny. You play the new recruit that gets hired, and then you're just like following them around. It's very story based, so it was pretty good.
Very cool.
Welcome to our Ghostbusters television podcast.
We talk about
television
Ghostbusters
podcast?
Every Saturday.
Every Saturday, we talk about Ghostbusters. No, we're going to talk about RPGs, role-playing games, specifically D&D. But this week, we're going to talk a little bit about world building.
And some other non-D&D games.
And a lot of non-D&D games, because I don't think either of us played Dungeons & Dragons this week, or did you?
Oh, I did.
Oh, you did? Good.
I did.
I wanted to touch briefly that I'm always amazed on how people can get so creative rolling dice. Because we have all of these different games and all of these different rule sets and da-da-da, but at the end of the day, you're literally rolling, a set of dice to see if you got a number. And if you did, the thing happened. And if you didn't, something else happened. And case in point, Lex and I were filming some more game reviews for the Jocular Junction channel. Mm-hmm. And we came across this game called Durf, and it's DURF, and it's on itch.io. I believe I put a link right before we started, so if you hit refresh, it might be in the show notes down below. But it's only like 8 pages. But it had, again, and we'll be doing like a full review with Lex, or I'll be doing a full review with Lex later, but it's recorded. I just haven't edited it. There's a really cool, interesting mechanic where you have a set amount of HP. So instead of HP being something that grows with level, your way to negate hit points kind of grow with level. And it made me think a lot of Invisible Sun, which is, we tried that out for the first time on Wednesday, where Invisible Sun, when you take 3 damage, that turns into a wound. And when you take 3 wounds, that turns into you're dead. And you don't get more hit points later on. That is set for all 10 levels or 12 levels of your character. But what you get is ways to negate that because you're actually getting better at stuff. So hypothetically, a level 1 character and a level 10 character could still putting it in D&D terms, get like a fire breath to the face and be insta-killed. It's just at higher levels, you're more experienced to negate damage and swirl the fire around you to protect yourself and, you know, things like that. And it's a system that I really like because it doesn't, or that idea, because you think about it, like, we're not gaining hit points except maybe from ages baby to 18. So,
right.
I don't know. But I wanted to hear your thoughts, I guess. Like, do you like the hit point mechanic?
That's a great question.
That it's so ingrained in us, isn't it?
We must like it because it's in nearly every video game
we
play, and it's the only way for them to balance insta-death character, right? Because pretty much any one of us that gets hit by somebody swinging a sword is not going to have a good day.
Yeah.
One hit.
Yeah.
So if we're going to play a game, we have to come up with some way to make that a little bit more interesting and not get killed. That's very interesting. Well, starting off the show, we didn't have a lot of news either. So this is why we're going to have lots of topics today. So these will be good. I liked when you described DERF to me. I like the idea of games that are lethal, even from 1 all the way up to their highest level, but there's still that chance that the dice gods could turn and you're snuffed out due to exploding dice or some type of mechanic,
or like
that gives
falling
you
in lava.
wounds.
Like that's the one that I always think of for D&D.
Yeah.
Because you're like, well, I fell in lava, but I have 152 hit points because I'm level 7 or something. And you're like, yeah, but it's lava. Like, like doesn't matter if you're like, can you magically protect yourself against, you know? So
yeah. But then I guess in my mind, it's all about hit points aren't necessarily, to me, scratches and broken bones on a character. And I think I used to think that, and I switched my perception to being hit points are all about all the things that come together that help you negate or get out of the way of damage. Even when you get hit, a slight dodge to the left made a lethal hit because you didn't dodge when you were level 1, but now you're level 4 and you're better at doing that. Even though there's nothing in the mechanics that said you did that, in my mind, you've shifted just enough out of the way. It was only a cut versus it was, you know, your arm fell off if you'd gotten
and
hit.
a level 1 character
it
wouldn't
has to
be
be
able
a little
to do
bit more
that.
abstract, right? Yeah. And the other reason I had to do that with D&D is because you can gain them back so quickly, right? Not only can you have 170 points, jump in the lava, roll the damage, jump out of the lava, run around, you can take a 10-minute rest, use up a bunch of hit dice, and you're back to full as if nothing happened. So there is this disconnect if we try to attach that to what would happen for real people. But then again, I think, you know what? I'm not my character either. I don't have an 18 dexterity. I don't have a 20 constitution. Lucien might have a 5 constitution. Who knows? We don't even know what the average. I mean, maybe we're 8s. Have we ever decided what normal people are in a D&D world? Would Jordan in a D&D world, what would he be? He'd definitely be a commoner. And what would his stats be? Would they all be 8s? Would they be 10s? Would they be
okay? I'm hurt.
What would they
now.
be?
We don't need to just criticize the way I look. Okay?
And I would be worse. Look at my health. I'd be even lower.
No, that's a good way of putting it though, because you can heal it. I guess we have words like cure wounds that makes you think that you're actually healing a wound, and I feel like it's portrayed in that from a binary computer game kind of logic, which I know a lot of that logic for RPGs and computer games came from early Dungeons and Dragons. It's a very like numerical way of just saying this guy will last longer than this guy. This bunny rabbit will die in 1 hit, and this, you know, giant sloth will die in 15 hits or something. So I get it that it's simple, but I want to change my mindset. And when the wording of Dungeons and Dragons says cure light wounds or heal wounds or
it's hard
healing word, you're not like I would love like, let me reinvigorate you. And then, okay, I've got 40 more hit points now. But we kind of treat that reinvigoration as temporary hit points, you know, like you're over and above what you could possibly be. You're like energized. I don't know. I've been playing around with this idea of hit points since reading DERF, and then we played Invisible Sun, and I was like, I want to rethink that because I really like that idea.
And I think hit points can be codified differently depending on what game you're playing. And maybe in an OSR game, it makes more sense that a stab of a sword that's 7 hit points is a very deadly thing. And that really is the representation of somebody stabbing a sword through your chest, right? Versus DD5E now isn't really that. So maybe hit points are more about your ability to continue fighting before you just drop to the ground and you're unconscious and out, right? It doesn't necessarily mean a sword went through your chest. It just means that you're slowly getting worn down. And there's a point when you hit 0 that you're done. You're just fall over. Your body can no longer react. Your body can no longer dodge. You can nothing lucky can no longer happen. You're out. That's where your death is. And then your blood bleeds out unless somebody helps you.
So how do you treat a severed arm, a broken leg?
But we don't do that because there's no rule that says your arm was severed unless I guess you get to like a Vorpal weapon maybe.
Yeah.
Right, where you say you can take a limb off.
Well, and so I guess that's my bigger question. Do you have those rules for yourself in D&D? I can't think of a specific 5e mechanic, but I know
there's a weapon that does it.
Yeah, the Vorpal weapon will slice off stuff. But I know that Indoor Adventurer ran that Curse of Strahd game, and the Paladin lost an arm in that game.
Sure.
And Eberron has a lot of mechanics of like, oh, you lost an arm, and we'll create this facsimile arm for you, and so you have like a robotic arm to kind of help you.
But if you lose that arm, do you take 50 points off your hit point total? Do you take 60 points? Do you take 10 points off? Like your total doesn't go down.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't think there's rules for it.
Yeah, I think it's just a thematic.
Would you want to add something like that though?
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, your leg is broken or it healed wrong. You now have a -10 to your speed. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there are some games that do that, and I think they would be interesting for the right players in the right group. I think maybe Warhammer comes to mind, where when you start to take those type of you lose limbs, it affects stats, it affects movement, it
Savage
affects
Worlds
things.
Deadlands does that.
Then I think you want to, you go into that game wanting to play that type of game, and then you run with it. I don't think anybody goes to D&D where, all right, if you lose your arm, let's take off 50 hit points, or let's say you get 1 attack now per round. You used to have 3 attacks per round because you were a fighter and you were 7th level, but you lost your arm, so now you're down to 1 attack, or something weird like that. So I don't know if anybody wants that.
Steve has a good point in chat. He says that 0 hit points is more about, like, when you're at 0 hit points, that's when an attack can connect. So that's when the sword does go through your chest.
I've started to lean a little that way too. I mean, I like the idea that you're taking wounds, you're taking scratches or cuts, but they're maybe trivial. But I kind of like where he's going with that. That's a good point. I like that.
So there you go.
You have to abstract it a little bit. But I like what you're saying. Just go back to your original point. Small games, 8-page DERF can give you a set of rules that make you rethink or want to experiment with even the games you're familiar with over 4 or 5 or 6 years you've been playing, 10 years, and you're just like, oh, that's kind of a cool thing. How would that affect if I kind of slid that one little piece over here? How would that change things? And I do like that. Another one that there was a Breakers game that the guy who invented, I'm forgetting his name, but he did Blades in the Dark. So people in chat will probably know who that author is. I'm forgetting his name at the moment, but he created every now and then, I think once a year, they do 2-page RPGs challenge or something. And they just create a 2-pager, and those can be fun. And he did one that was called Breakers. That was really fun and engaging. I was shocked at how fun of a game you could make with just 2 pages. You were limited to 2 pages of rules and go.
John Harper is who you're talking
John Harper.
about.
Thank you.
He also did a game called Dungeon World or World of Dungeons or something.
Nope, that's Adam Kobold did Dungeon World.
Okay, Adam Kobold did Dungeon World. Then he did World of Dungeons, and it's specifically it's another 2-page RPG.
That could be true.
And because Lex and I reviewed it, and that was another thing where if you give them the right.
John Harper is great about those small condensed rules and playing around, and he's a graphic artist, so he kind of puts them together in ways that are really evocative when you look at the 2 pages too. So it's really nice. I bet Lex looks at his stuff quite a bit.
Yeah. There were a couple things that came down my news thing. I didn't actually have this in our notes. I'm sorry, because I just thought of it while we were talking.
I'm not talking about that.
But for those of you who are Kingdom and Warfare backers of MCDM, there was an email last night, I think, 18 hours ago.
I haven't seen this. Check my email.
That said, hey, as an apology for the book being delayed, one of our really cool playtesters expanded upon Kingdoms and Warfare, and we decided to, like, they bought it from him because they're like, this is great. We're gonna buy it and sell it,
and they're good about paying people, yep.
And they gave it away for free as kind of like a, hey, we're sorry.
Cool.
Here, take it. So I just remember that, and I went and downloaded it. So check your email. But it looks like
Matt Colville's my favorite.
It's just kind of an expansion on Kingdoms and Warfare in some sense, but I haven't had a good time to go through it.
Very cool.
And then there was a big release from what is the name? Elderbryn is the name of this company, I think. I gotta bring it up though. You guys
not in the notes.
It's taken so long. And the reason I bring this up is it's a 900 and plus page PDF that
Tolus size
released. It's so big.
Tolus. Now you're talking.
And
we're going the other
that
route.
Is the adventure. And then there's like a 50-page like player immersion thing that's got all these new subclasses and stuff.
For what system?
For 5e.
Oh,
yeah.
Whoa. Okay.
We're going to talk about 5e. It's crazy. I just have to find it.
You got to send me that. I'm always interested in somebody that's willing to put together 900 pages of content.
Ridiculous. So I had to download the low res version because I tried the high res and it was like, this is not happening.
This ain't going to happen.
917. So it's called From Elder Brain, and it's Crown of the Oathbreaker. And it looks pretty cool. But yeah, they have a 6-chapter adventure, Crown of the Oathbreaker. And I don't know if it's like an evil campaign. I'm not really sure, but like it's so detailed. And this will actually go into talking about world building here in a second. The world is huge. And this is a 900-page PDF that you're, and not a book, but like a PDF that you're expected to read, kind of like Tolus. And Tolus is another great example.
When you need it, do you think you need to read it, or do you think you can just reference it? They've got it ready for when you.
That's a good question. I have no idea. Okay. And then there's this 53-page of playing a character in this world.
Yeah, if I read 900, the players need to read 50.
And it has 3 different subclasses for every class except Artificer.
Okay,
like 12 feats. A whole bunch of new spells. Kind of cool. One of these. You
bought this, or they're just throwing it out there?
It is for purchase. The company sent it to me because they want me to review it, so I got it for free.
Gotcha.
And so, and they're not sponsored or anything. I just wanted to talk about it because I was like, okay, yeah, lots of people send me PDFs because that's an easy way of like, hey, free advertising, and I'm like, maybe.
Well, hey, they've already gotten a little bit of free advertising this morning. Look at that.
But there's an ooze domain for cleric that we talk about favorite monsters. I love oozes. I think that's really cool. So could be fun.
Let's do this.
Our barbarian spell eater, a spell thief for rogue, a lycanthropic bloodline for sorcerer.
I like that.
Way of the 9 seals for monk. That's kind of fun. And what's another? Oh, I like this one too. School of Shadow. Now I'm going off of just for wizards. Sorry, School of Shadow.
Just the names.
Wizards.
Just the names are cool.
They could be terrible mechanics. I have no idea.
Yeah, who knows? They could be great and awesome mechanics. Elder Brain. Send Sir Lucien a PDF. He would love to see this.
Yeah. I have no idea how expensive it is, but Cleric of Juiblix. Yes, that's exactly right. I did not sign an NDA.
And I always buy, if I like something, even that was sent to me, I typically go and buy it anyways, because I want the creators to get, their due diligence for, their
well, if I
kudos
was
for
going to
doing it.
use this,
Heck yeah.
I would like a hard copy because I like reading hard
Oh my
copies.
God,
And I'm a
I
collector of
A
RPGs. At this
900
point.
page hard copy book of that.
They got to break it up. You can't Tolis it. Maybe you can.
Maybe you can.
So speaking of Tolis and speaking of a lot of that other stuff, I have been reading Knock, which is a magazine, zine magazine.
Doesn't look like a magazine.
It's kind of yeah, it's got a desk cover. It's like, I don't know. But this is it. Knock. This is issue 1. I actually am reading issue 2 as I finish this one. And it's full of cool RPG articles and maps and other fun stuff. The reason
Who puts that together?
Huh?
Who puts it together?
Oh, the Merry Mushman.
The Merry Mushman.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very OSR indie kind of zine.
Take your drink, everyone.
Well, that's not DCC. Okay, now you can take a drink. But that's issue 1. Issue 2 is upstairs, which we're going to talk about an article that I read in issue 2 a couple nights ago. Issue 3 just finished their Kickstarter and are now getting the PDF and stuff out to people. If you're interested, there's links down below to all of these. The physical copy might be a little difficult to get, but the PDF is always available on drive-thru or something like that.
And it's
specifically they're in Europe, so getting it over to America takes a little bit.
So it's just Knock, but then it's like, here's the first. Each one's called Knock, but then it's like
Knock 1, Knock 2. Knock is the title of the magazine.
Yeah. That's the title of the magazine.
And then what the magazine actually is.
Is it a monthly?
No. They do a Kickstarter and they put this together. So they've only done 3. So maybe a year, maybe every 6 months. But it's a collection of articles. A lot of these OSR articles and blog posts and stuff are floating around the web. And these guys were like, hey, we want to like congeal these into something that's useful rather than like, I'm scouring the internet for useful information. So you'll find maps in here. You'll find little adventures. You'll find articles on like, how do you handle like death in an RPG or something. Like, I don't know. I should just read off some of the titles here. But it's designed by the same people that made, what is that? Morkborg, I think.
Oh,
so it's got the same like crazy layouts and stuff like that. So it's visually very interesting. Here are some articles. What I want in an OSR game: a comparison of old D&D and new D&D. Monster design. What's the deal with Igor's hump? Monster derangement syndrome. 8 variants of the Cave of Chaos. So like, yeah, they're just really cool articles, really fun art and things like that.
And it must be lots of artists they're pulling together from the OSR community. Correct. And then they
and a lot of public domain art, I think, as
like
well,
a Zine style publication thing. Okay.
And then, cool. It's basically a big zine.
Yeah.
And they do a Kickstarter, so they're paying all of their artists and stuff. Really cool stuff. But so long-winded way of saying, I read this really cool article in Knock issue number 2 called "Worldbuilding: When is Enough Too Much?" And I think our listeners and you obviously know that I love world building and I love fantasy worlds.
So and this was shot right at you. You're
like, It was. It was interesting reading this because it's been 2 years, I think, since I did my 30-day world building challenge.
Which was cool.
Which I had a lot of fun.
A lot of fun on the channel.
And the long story short is they're saying that most people don't want that. Like you spend all this time creating a world and you sit at night and you fret like, well, the people from the north, I don't really know if they would even try to invade the Southlands. Like, what do they gain from that, you know? And you're overthinking it as a world creator when your players are like, I just want to throw my sword at somebody. Can like that's the bad guy. Point me in the right direction. Mm-hmm. And they use the example of the Lord of the Rings novels, where a lot of people have read Lord of the Rings, but like they also haven't read there's a smaller minority of people that have read the Silmarillion and enjoy those. I am one of those people that really enjoy the Silmarillion because I love the lore and I love like where did all these people come from and how does it all tie together?
Yeah, the history.
But Lord of the Rings objectively is the story of Frodo taking the One Ring and destroying it. And that is interesting. The story is interesting. Not this like hypothetical world. And they use an example of, dear DM, if you would roll your eyes at a player giving you a 5-page character backstory that they want you to read, don't expect them to read your world primer as you're like, here. So I feel like I was put on blast, and I'm like, okay, that's interesting.
I feel like I need to argue this. I feel like I need to.
And I want your take, I guess, because like I have a whole YouTube channel dedicated to RPG or D&D history, like fictional history. Mm-hmm. I love knowing things about the world and then playing in that world, also knowing those things. But as a player, as a DM, I never expect my players to have that same level of interest. And it's actually better if they don't, because then they can be surprised by things. This is a reason that DM Nathan has specifically said, I'll never run the Forgotten Realms for Jordan. Even though he is a fan of the realms and knows a lot about the realms, he doesn't want to be in a situation where I'm like, actually, or where I do just know that he did something that's counterintuitive to what I know about the realms.
I'm going to say right now, DM Nathan, I've ran Jordan through Forgotten Realms adventures, and don't worry about it. He doesn't remember that much.
So it's weird and interesting. I don't know. I just thought this was a cool article about how do you feel about world building, and is it important to you, or is it more of an adventure? And I'll let you talk, and then I have other points. But
yeah, I think the first read through for me, there was a couple things that writer pointed out. I don't know if it was a he or him. He, she, him. I didn't see who the name was. So whoever they were. I did like that in the article, they did say in a line, now, my opinion may be skewed because during the Google Plus days, I was only really interested in the OSR kind of scene. And I do feel like the OSR scene is less about world building and more about the here and the now, the funnels, the gameplay as it is at the moment, the short adventures, that kind of style of game, almost original D&D when it was about dungeon diving and it wasn't about a world had been built yet, right? If you ever talk about how the originals kind of started.
It wasn't about creating a narrative.
Each DM had their own dungeon and they ran people through dungeons.
It was
right.
Hey,
so that's
it's a
how
dungeon.
It starts.
Let's go. Yeah.
Yeah. And then eventually people want to build worlds and do worlds. So then I'm like, okay, so that's a good caveat, because you always want to point out that I might be blind to other parts of what was going on. And that's why I think there weren't a lot of people that like world building. And then he used that example, like you said, Lord of the Rings. And I kind of thought hard on that one, because it seems to me like, I don't know. I was trying to think of another franchise that was the same, but would prove the opposite, right? Like the Game of Thrones, there were tons and tons of people that were looking up the history of Game of Thrones stuff, looking at the stuff. They're excited about the prequel that's going to come up. They're excited about all the after show stuff was highly kind of watched. Now, it probably wasn't on the same percentage of the people that watch the show versus the people that go look for extra information. So there's definitely a difference between, 50 billion people watch the show and maybe 1 billion go and look up more info. And so I think we're in that group that's smaller that like to dive deeper into something we enjoy, but there are other people that like to just enjoy the thing and then move on.
And I like to call that secret knowledge. And I see it a lot when I watch Marvel movies with my friends, where I don't know anything about Moon Knight. I really enjoy Marvel, obviously, but I'm watching Moon Knight and I'm like, oh, this is a fun, enjoyable thing. And then I have friends who are like, oh, but you didn't even like that character. He's actually this. And when he's talking to that person, like, oh my God, you don't even know. And they know because they have all of this, quote, secret knowledge. And it's kind of the same thing where you watch The Hobbit and you're like, oh, they have the Arkenstone. And there's people that are like, oh my God, the Arkenstone. Like, you don't even know. And like, so I don't know if that's something there, but like, it was interesting. This article is basically saying not telling you, but like leaning towards there's not a market for writing textbook histories of your fictional world because nobody cares. And something that I wanted to touch on was don't give me homework. And that if I'm buying a setting like the Forgotten Realms, I should be able to sit down at the table and run it with casual references to it, as opposed to having to study it the night before so that I can run it the next day. And that got me thinking about Invisible Sun and all this other stuff. Like, it's such a crazy world that you guys are running around in. And I find it so interesting because I've spent the last like year casually reading through it off and on again, absorbing all this material. And I feel like my players, like Lucien here and Indoor and LB and Lex, they were my players, that you guys wouldn't enjoy it as much because you don't have that foundation that I have. And when we played on Wednesday, I said, I feel like this is a game for dungeon masters to play with other dungeon masters because dungeon masters understand, like there's a bigger thing and things like that. So that's my caveat segue into how do you feel about, go ahead. Sorry.
But here's my counterpoint to the argument.
Counter.
So that was me kind of agreeing a little bit with what and if you read the article, a summation of it would be, don't overdo your world building because your players are more concerned about the present, what their characters are in, versus if you write what happened 20 years ago, and that is not relevant to anything the players are going to fall into, right? So it's like, nobody wants that. Nobody
they don't
cares
need to know that the third king of the second age was named.
They don't care about that, even though you're really into it. They care about, what's the name of the tavern that they're starting at and what's the adventure they're going, type of thing. So I understood where they were going. And he also said, though, there's a pendulum, though, that you can do too little also.
Yeah. So
there is a too much and there is a too little. And then I thought that's what triggered my counterpoint to his argument. And I think the actual Lucien's opinion reason for that is we are getting fantasy world building from pop culture and books we read and movie shows we talk about and watch and TV shows, that we get so much of that world building. We don't necessarily need it when the DM's going to start the new campaign. And he says, hey, we're in a fantasy dark world. Okay, well, we all have been in fantasy dark worlds. We all understand what that means. I don't need you to re-explain what dwarves are and elves are and how they were, none of that matter. I get it. We're in a world with elves and dwarves and stuff. I've watched shows, I've read books. I'm with you. So they're bored, I think, because all the world building came from all the other entertainment that they get. Mm-hmm. But now you do a campaign based on something there is no show about, or there is no big thing. You can't just walk into that and say 5 lines and say, here, you're in this world. It has these gates. You can move around. Magic's, there's 25 different types of magic. All right, ready to play? It doesn't work if there's nothing for me to ground it with and say, this is this super futuristic Matrix style game. Even then I still have, Matrix style. Okay. I kind of get, so I think when we talked about Invisible Sun a little bit, it was this idea of a world we had no reference to. We had nothing to tie it to say this is like that. So that did all the world building for me. And now the DM can add to the world building of that or change some things to make sure we're right. Versus, hey guys, we're going to play a Mad Max style game. Mm-hmm. Ready to go? In your head, you're like, yeah, I got my mohawk. I got my axe made out of, some type of pipe and metal that I put together. And I put on some like tire armor. Let's do, you didn't have to tell me, okay, remember in this world, your armor is made of tire and recycled bits. And in this world, it's deserty and water is the biggest thing. Like, you didn't have to tell me that. You told me, hey, we're playing Mad Max. We're ready to go. So I think that's a little bit where it comes from, Dungeon Master. So this is what I would say. If you're going to play a fantasy game that's very much like a Forgotten Realms, you don't have to go overboard in explaining a fantasy world to your players because they're kind of already on board. My second counterpoint to that is, but what about Keith Baker?
Mm-hmm.
If he read that article, he would stop writing about Eberron. Do you want Keith Baker to stop telling us more and more and more stuff about Eberron? Heck no, there's a huge community of people that want everything Keith Baker can give us, right? Everything he puts out, we want. Just if you're a big Eberron fan.
And he's
so
even
I wonder.
he said in interviews that he's very interested in writing about, subject Y from Eberron, but he has to balance that with, will it sell? Are other people interested enough that they're willing to buy this? And so he doesn't put effort into things unless he knows that people are like, I want to know about this. And that Exploring Eberron book he came out with had a lot of information about the planes of existence that he interpreted, and also had a lot of information about undersea races and kingdoms that had never been touched in Eberron before. Because that was what people wanted from him, But I know that he's like, I would love to write all kinds of weird little geopolitical stuff set during the war or something. But yeah.
And so I think you could get a skewed sense of what you think the tabletop community wants based on the game you're the most into. If you're an Eberron person and you've loved Eberron, you've been playing Eberron for a couple of years, that article to you, I think, would be jarring because you're like, no, I love world building. I want to know the history of everything. I want to know whatever I can. But if you're OSR, I think that's different because there's no worlds we can think of that are OSR worlds, right? We don't think of specific campaign settings that are OSR for the most part. They're generic. They're not named. They're not.
Well, there's so many. Yeah, there's so many people working in the OSR that they don't really have a specific like.
It's a different mentality, I think. Yeah, it's a different. We're not trying to build.
There are though. I want to point that out. Like Dolmenwood is a OSR setting, so there are settings out there, but like they're usually like little one-off zines. Like I got Nightland was a really interesting one, but it's really more of like a point adventure in this weird world of Nightland as opposed to a whole campaign setting. Yeah.
And there's probably not a lot of people that could name that, right? You might have had to have come across it versus a lot of people have heard the words Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or Dragonlance or
Game of Thrones.
Eberron at this point. Or even if you go over to Paizo's, I always get theirs wrong because I pronounce it wrong, but it's like Glor Glorian or Glora something. The Pathfinder crowd out there in your chat will remember the name of their world. So you can really grab those. Or when you're talking about, look at like when you grab onto a show and you want to know everything about it and the history about it. Like if you're a Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
It's based on a book. I better go read
You want to know everything about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. You want to know what came before Buffy. You want to know what comes after Buffy. You want to know, how does Angel fit into this? Now, what came before Angel? What came after? You're ready to. You're a Supernatural fan. You want to know all that kind of stuff. You're a Game of Thrones fan. You want to know all of that. You're a Robert Jordan Wheel of Time fan, which is a huge spanning cycle of the wheel. There's been 9 ages, or Numenera. That you're in the 9th.
Numenera
world.
is a big one actually because that's another. Yeah. I mean, Monty Cook did Numenera and Galarian.
Galorian, that's the one.
Zris, our resident Pathfinder.
I'm trying to be more Pathfindery. I'm getting there, guys. I'm getting there.
Yeah. But yeah, again, I think this always comes, not again, but to me, this really comes back to Monty Cook because we had a really good discussion about like setting being joined with the gameplay. Yeah. And Invisible Sun does that. Numenera does that really well. And then they branched Numenera off into the Cypher system because they realized they could use it for other things. But yeah it's kind of interesting that like to play Numenera is more than just, I like this dice mechanic. You have to also get invested in this world. With Invisible Sun, it feels like it works a little bit because the characters specifically are waking up to the fact that the world is a lot bigger place than they thought. And that's why I talk about the Matrix, because It's the idea that you wake up and you're like, oh, the world was fake. Here's the real world. But I have to learn what this real world is. And that's the same kind of thing with Invisible Sun. So from that standpoint, it kind of works, but not with Numenera. Like you've been part of that world for a long time and you're trying to figure out like, what is all this stuff? But he does a good job of saying like, well, the catch-all phrase is that must be Numenera. That's either technology, magic, or science gone haywire. Who knows? So I don't know.
I think that's our lead into what we did this week. But that's what I thought about the article.
Yeah. Again, I've been really enjoying these Knock magazines. I finished the first one. Lots of really cool, interesting stuff. And then Knock 2, I'm there. I'm almost done with it. And then Knock 3 is coming in the mail any day now because I kickstarted that one. But just made me think. I really like that section of like don't be frustrated if your player gives you a 5-page backstory, but they're unwilling to read your like 30-page primer on the world. And as I am trying to run a Eberron campaign, I have to remind myself that these people don't know Eberron. They're curious about it, but they're not curious enough to like read a whole thing about it.
You can't give them homework. You're going to lose them.
This reminds me of Hot Springs Island because when I was running that, they found the in-book of Hot Springs Island. That is a field guide to Hot Springs Island,
which you're allowed to give to the players, right?
And they all went home. They all had the PDF. Next week they came back and Nathan said, "Did anybody read the book?" And everyone was like, I don't know. And he's like, "That's okay. I read the whole thing twice," because he was so curious and interested.
So 1 out of 3. You had three players. So there's our ratio.
4 players. Yeah. So 1 out of 4. But Nathan is also a dungeon master and he loves stuff like that. He loves world building. So for him, that wasn't homework. He was very excited to learn more about this crazy place. So
I think that's the true thing right there. You just said that should have been at the end of the article. 1 out of 4 people will love your world building.
Yeah.
The other 3 are going to be bored to death and probably won't like it at all. But there will be that one.
There is that caveat, yeah. So we played Invisible Sun. We're going to play 2 sessions. We played 1 session, and then the next one is next Wednesday. Lucien is playing a Apothic, which is
apostate.
Apostate, thank you. Which is a character that rejects all of the magical
organized
magic.
Yeah, but it did say it had some church connotations in there. I didn't read a lot into that part because I didn't know if there were churches or anything in.
There's no churches, but to be a Visle, which is to be part of the magical community, a lot of times they say, "Oh, you're part of the Church of the Invisible Sun," and that's just kind of a catch-all for saying you're magical.
That's what he was talking about.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Because you're magical. Because the Invisible Sun is magic. It's everywhere. Talk about world building. That is a crazy world. I was amazed with you guys not wanting to attack anything. Because I'm like, hey, I want to like try out combat, and everybody did everything possible to not attack the monster, and that was fun and interesting. But what were your thoughts? Did you? I mean, we all had fun, I feel, but because it's just fun to play games. But
well, I think it was nice because a lot of us went into it with different ideas. I definitely went in with the idea, I just want to learn kind of how a round or a session or an instance goes and how you're going to stitch those together to be a game, right? So like if you're to do it in D&D terms, you would have your role playing would be going on, something happens, initiative happens, you switch over to combat rounds. That concludes, you can maybe do some more role play. Maybe there's a little bit of role play going in between, and then that's the game. You do that for a couple hours at night. Everybody has fun. You go home, and that's the thing. I was interested in what Invisible Sun was going to do because it's not as structured as I could tell, but it did have structure that I didn't realize was there. And then once you started trying it, you could see that it was there. And then once Numenera, because I have played Numenera, and that's the first game I ran as a dungeon master when I decided to be a dungeon master, it started to click even more and more for me throughout the night as we were moving. And I could tell, oh, maybe I could run Invisible Sun now because now I'm starting to understand a little bit more.
Yeah, you were the only player that had played Numenera. I was surprised that all of our super RPG friends had never played Numenera, and I was like, really? I need to run Numenera for you guys.
Yeah, this is such a fun game. Such cool mechanics. So I went into it like that. Other people went into it like, hey, Jordan's going to let me play this cool character in this cool, crazy world that he's super excited about. Okay, I'll jump in and play. I don't care. I'll roll some dice. And then other people were like, into how to create my character. So they were like, I was, spent some time building their character and wondering what it was going to be like. And, and so we had a lot of different things we came into. We rushed into kind of a scene so that Jordan could kind of start showing us the rules.
Yeah.
And we kind of played from there. I think the big thing that we found as we played, we started out very disconnected, and we started not quite knowing what's going on, what you can or can't do, what's the structure, when should I do it, when shouldn't I do it, how does this thing work? So there was a lot of that in the beginning, but I think as we moved and worked through different, how do I cast a spell? Well, somebody cast one, so we figured that out. How do we do this thing? Somebody does that, so we figured that out. And as we began to move through those pieces, as the night went on, it was becoming easier and easier to get to the part that would just be playing the game, not so much learning how to play, but playing the game. So a few sessions down the line, I could tell we would have a good understanding of the rules. We'd have an understanding of how the structure of the game works, and we could really dive into a fun, interesting story that Jordan would craft. So I got that. But it taught me a lesson about being careful to not distract if you're trying to learn a new system, that you don't necessarily want to completely divorce let's don't talk about too much of the world. We're just going to jump into it. If it's a world that nobody really has any idea about, right? If it was a world we understood, I think that works. But this is when you don't understand Invisible Sun, right? You have to read a little bit about it. You have to kind of get into it. You have to
that's a good question.
Told what's going on.
Do you feel like you have to do homework, or that if we kept playing you would get the gist of it?
Yeah, because I felt like in this one, I think you did. You want to do a little homework, because what does it mean to be an apostate? Right?
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. I'm an iconoclastic apostate who whispers to a serpent was my class name, actually.
So who is this serpent?
Right. But if you say, hey, we're going to play a game, and Jordan, you're the fighter, and LB, you're the magic user, that grounds you a little bit, because you kind of know what a fighter is. You kind of know what a magic user is, and we'll move forward. I didn't know what an apostate was. I didn't know what we had. A weaver, an apostate. We had a goetic, when I had never heard. I didn't know what that was. And then a what?
Advance.
An advance, which I kind of know only because Vancian, as long as that is the connection. Because if it's not, then I wouldn't know what that was, right? So this game, Invisible Sun, likes to use words. Your brain doesn't necessarily connect to other things you've done before or heard before or are in your normal media. So you feel like you don't know what's going on. So I think this game takes a little bit of homework to start to understand vocabulary and terminology, and to understand what those things mean. And then when you have a little bit of that, then the game rules can come in and help you say, okay, now let's play a game that's based in that world.
Yeah.
So it was interesting. I think it was a great experiment of learning how to play, and it made me super interested. It did not turn me off. There was nothing in it that said, okay, this isn't the game for me. And I bumped into some RPGs that are like that, where I'll start to play and I'm like, well, I don't know. This just doesn't feel like the RPG for me.
Yeah,
I didn't get that. Yeah. So I didn't get that.
And
so
actually, Indoor even posted like a few days later, like, I know we were kind of like really critical about it, but I can't stop thinking about that game. Like, I want to play it some more. And I was like, well, it's doing its job then.
It's got its hook in, yes.
But I also, I think a lot about theater, especially with this game, but like with RPGs in general. And that as a director, when you're directing a play, you control all of these different elements to create how the audience should feel in a specific moment or setting. And then you trust your actors to kind of convey that. And this felt very similar, where Monty Cook has crafted a game that he really wanted to invoke a specific feeling, emotion, idea. And so I think the confusion is part of what he wanted. Like, you know, and we could say like, well, that's a bad choice. Well, it's his choice to make. But I think that that's what he wanted, because if you feel out of place playing this, well, then your character is also out of place in this world they don't understand as well. And I think using words like, oh, I'm part of the Order of Goetica, like, what is that? You know, or I'm an apostate who has a snake person or something. I don't understand. Well, either does your character, and that's why it's kind of spooky and crazy. But I will say that you said that if we had done the actual longer session 0 rather than just jumping in with pre-made characters, you would have had a better understanding of the world, of your character, and of your character's place in the world. And so this is a game that really benefits from a session 0.
I think so.
More
because
than other games. Like, yeah.
Because you can't draw. There's no other show that you can point to and say, oh, it's like this, so that does the work for you of a session 0 in a way. And nobody's played it before, so you can't say, you know, like last campaign, but this time we're over here in this place. So there's nothing to really.
That's why I don't think it works.
You need
as
a good,
shot.
strong session 0 for this one.
Yeah.
To start.
The more we're playing this, I'm like, I don't think it works as a one shot, even though that's exactly what we're doing, is playing through a single little adventure to test it out. Yeah. But you need that, you know, you need a one shot sometimes to test out a system before really investing heavily into it.
Yeah.
And
there's a couple of tabletop role-playing games out there that are built around, you have a session that builds the world you're going to play in.
Yeah.
And the players get to contribute to that. And to me, I forgot that this is one of those.
Yep.
I forgot that this is like a mothership. I forgot that this is like where we decide, what does magic look like? Yep. What kinds of magic are around? What are the things that make sense to us and we know is going on? And we build connections and relationships with the people we're about to play with. We build NPCs that the dungeon master can pull on, and we start to talk about the setting and we can move forward. So there are some games that you have to do that. The game wouldn't be the same if you didn't do that piece first. So I went into this like it's Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or Numenera, you know, or those, and I should have went into it. It was more like a mothership or I think it's a Powered by the Apocalypse will do this. Dungeon World did this, where you decide what kind of world your dungeon world is. What kind, are there elves? Are there not elves? Are there dwarves? Are there not dwarves? Let's all come up as a community with things that we are knowns. Let's come up with things that are kind of unknown, we don't know too much about, and we go from there and explore this world. There's a really, really fun, interesting thing there. So I forgot that when I went into this, but it was fun. I mean, I feel like as we talked and the messages I saw from you was that you were encouraged to continue to see more or to understand Invisible Sun. I didn't feel like what happened that night, even if it wasn't smooth or if somebody watched it and said, you guys weren't really doing anything. What was really going on?
We didn't
barely
stream, so you didn't
rules,
miss
blah,
anything,
blah, blah.
But.
Yeah. But I didn't feel like you came out of that going, oh, okay, we gave it a shot. I'll just put this away. It'll gather dust somewhere on a shelf and I'll never touch it again.
I very much want to keep playing.
And
if it was either with you or if it was with like the group that we currently have, or at the table, if I could, I love you guys, but I really want to play at the table because we talked about all of the physical props and stuff that come with the game, and having the cards in your hand would make a lot easier.
Yeah.
But
handing books around.
Yes. Like,
versus
you need
we
the
were
magic
flipping
book,
through PDFs.
But I really like, I think I really am just enamored with this world. It's so unique and so interesting. And so I want to keep playing in it. I want to keep telling stories in it.
Bring up what you brought, because you told us after the session was over, you started talking about the way Monty Cook put this game together and did things that are different than he would have done in other games or other designers had done in games. The idea of I don't really want PDFs for this. I
Yeah.
really, go into that, because I thought that was very telling. And had we known that walking into the session, that would have been really good knowledge.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, I'll try to put a link to my unboxing of Invisible Sun. It comes in this giant black cube, and all of the spells are not listed in the book like they are in D&D. They're all on individual spell cards. So a lot of props, a lot of like handing things back and forth to people.
Physical things.
And with that, when you have like a deck of cards, it's not really expected that your dungeon master, we'll say dungeon or game master, it's not expected that your game master is going to go through and read every single spell. It's the idea that like you kind of drop new spells here and there, maybe at random. So when Monty Cook originally was working on the Kickstarter, he did not want this to have a PDFs. He didn't want it to, and this was early, so I think like online gaming and the pandemic hit and they were like, but like he originally didn't want to give out PDFs. He wanted it to be a very physical thing that you play at a table with other friends. Even though he has an online section of it, which is a website that you can utilize to kind of communicate with your players. But the idea is that, yeah, he didn't want it released as any PDFs. Like if you either bought the book and had it or you don't. When their company really was one of the people that pushed forward like having PDFs. Like that's part of like, oh, you bought the game, here's the PDF. And then I think later on they were like, Monty, like we can sell PDFs, like it's fine, right? And so they ended up selling the digital black cube for $100, which when that was announced, everybody was like, $100 for PDFs, that's outrageous. But if you price out like the player's handbook, the monster manual, the dungeon master's guide, a couple of adventures, all of this other stuff. Like if you price all of those hypothetical PDFs, or we'll use like 4th edition PDFs, it's well over $100.
Yeah.
But again, Monty Cook, the idea is that you don't buy it separately. You get the whole thing. And then even after that, like a year after that, they started selling just the quote player's handbook of Invisible Sun. So you don't have to buy everything, but if you want just the player's handbook, you can. So I think they relaxed his original vision a little bit because they want to make money. But that's interesting, isn't it? Like he really was like, this is a self-contained black cube of fun, and you either buy it or you have everything, you don't, and then it doesn't have an online presence kind of a thing. But yeah, when we were talking, I really wished that they had built some kind of online character creator aid to play, because I would love to play this online with people like yourself who are also interested. But to have the tools, because I felt like I was fighting it a lot, trying to get you guys the correct spell cards and taking screenshots of it and sending you a JPEG. And it's like, I just want to be able to say, here are your cards. If we had them all in a Roll20 app or a virtual tabletop of any kind, and I could like throw you cards, that would be great. But
yeah. And I think LB had said something that was really good too. The layout of the information is definitely one of those styles where you have to hunt and peck and go, I got to look at this PDF, and then I got to go look at this PDF to find this other thing.
It's 4 books, and you open one and it'll reference another book. And I even said when I was planning the game, I had 3 of those books open on different pages, and I felt like I was in college, like referencing, going back and forth. That's very difficult with a PDF. And I want them to make one PDF that's searchable and lets me go and link and stuff. But that's not what Monty wants to do. So.
No. This felt to me like an artistic tabletop role-playing game as it was written, structured, and portrayed. It was supposed to be tactile. It was meant to be, I really think, played at the table with a few things that you would do outside of a weekly session or a bi-weekly session that you're playing. And I think it's clear and telling that it was made by creators who are used to be playing with each other live, but had just started to understand that our hobby has really moved online, and it really moved online in a big way because of COVID, obviously, but it was definitely trending that way anyways, because it did the one thing that getting everybody at the table together doesn't do is more consistency in people showing up and a wider player audience that you could possibly pull from, which then makes it more possible to play more games of different types versus you have to gather enough friends who are willing to come to your house, sit at your table on a regular basis. That's a hurdle. It can be done. Many people have done it, but it's definitely a hurdle for some people. There's many people who had wanted to play role-playing games, but had never had enough friends to be able to convince to do it, or family members or workers or whoever. They've never gotten the chance to do it because they were always in the mindset, I have to bring 2 or 3 people to my kitchen table to play, and I never can do it, without ever realizing or going out and finding that there are online tools. They might just drop it and never do it. There are people who have never got to play because they thought that's how it worked. So I think we're transitioning out of that. And I feel like this game came at the very end of, we play games at tables all the time.
Yeah.
We're now in the digital age, and he was just a little
I do.
late
I think it was that. I think creating it, they were still in the idea of like, you play at a table with friends, you roll dice.
Yeah.
And then right up until the Kickstarter, they were like, oh, people love virtual tabletops, and there's enough like internet bandwidth to make that happen. And then the game released, and it was just
people
like COVID,
cameras,
and it, you know,
VTTs are out. So I was encouraged. I thought it was a positive experience. I thought it was interesting. I feel more confident than I did before. Like when you had mentioned this before, I was really leery about Invisible Sun. You even said, hey, if you want to play maybe a month ago, you can play. And I was like, I don't know if I want to jump into this game. This game seems intimidating to me.
Yeah.
This game seems like it's bigger than I'm ready to jump into. But I'm glad I finally kind of last minute said, you know what, I'll jump in. I'm going to try it. I'm just going to go in with an open mind and see what it's like. And prove that fear I was kind of having, that trepidation I was having, was mostly unfounded. It was built up in my own mind about if it's going to be difficult, or if I'm going to like it, or do I want to get involved in it, or whatever. And really, after we started playing and started getting into it, there's a lot of fun to be there. I could see some really, really good stories happening in the way this world. I love the thing you even talked about. We didn't even get into it, but you're talking about we're in a city that's built up of neighborhoods that are rebuilding after something has happened.
Yeah. After
and our campaign would normally take, if you just took, at the book at face value and ran it the way they start you out, is that the idea is you're going to help rebuild some portion of this catastrophe that's happened. Right. And I love that idea of, oh, okay, wait a minute. We're going to bring a neighborhood together, or a borough of New York, or whatever term you want to use that says we're going to help rebuild the city. And it's this weird thing going on, and there's weird stuff, that we're learning about because we didn't know about it before. There's a lot there that sounds interesting to me now. So I was very encouraged.
That's cool. Well, and if you guys are curious, I did record the audio of our session. And I'm going to eventually put it up on the Patreon so you guys can listen to it if you're curious there. I guess you played some games, but we're a little over time, and I got to go pick up my son. So
I did play Invisible Sun. I did play Dungeon of the Mad Mage. We did level up. I'll keep it quick. I finally got to 5th level cleric, which was really nice, which my character's based off of Moon Knight. We've just been talking about watching Moon Knight too. So that's been fun. We're down another level. We're still doing a lot of drow stuff. So you'd have loved this because you've been dying to do a drow game. And this is 2 drow houses fighting against each other. And we're kind of in the middle of it.
Yeah.
See, exactly. So you would have really loved these levels, I think, had you been in this adventure. So, or if you do want to do Dungeon of the Mad Mage and you don't want to do the whole thing,
no, I was just thinking
use
steal
these levels.
Yeah, I want to steal those levels probably.
Yeah,
so that'd be awesome.
for sure. So, but that's all I got. I had a lot of fun. I've been playing a lot of Borderlands, not Borderlands, but Tiny Tina's Wonderland, which is so fun and so cool and so irreverent and so Ack Inc. like Dungeons and Dragons like that. It's super fun. If you haven't got it, pick it up or wait for it to get on sale, and definitely get it on sale. Don't let it go by without getting it. So
sweet.
That's it for me.
I'm playing in Lex's playtest some more today, so that'll be fun.
Very cool.
I went from like no games to playing lots of games. It feels like so.
In the last couple of weeks, I thought so too. Like
Yeah.
you were committed to some stuff. You were doing.
Well, I think
stuff
my
again.
wife she got done with a lot of her shows, and so she became more available to like watch Oliver. And then I was like, oh, I'm gonna go play D&D.
Of course, then you got a part in a play, so that.
And then I auditioned for a play, and I got a part, so that's fun too. But Nathan's campaign is running. I think they're having their last session in a few days, maybe Saturday, maybe tonight.
Wrapping it up.
And then we're going to start a new game. So I'm going to try to jump in on that one.
We need to get DM Nathan on. I want to talk to him about some of his campaigns.
We did. He's been on.
I know, but I mean, his more new stuff that I want to have. Okay. I have new questions for DM.
Oh, okay, cool. That's our show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for hanging out, liking, subscribing, sharing this podcast with your friends. If you are interested in Invisible Sun, I do believe it is sold out, so I apologize as of recording this. You can always get the PDFs over at DriveThruRPG or on Monty Cook's website, which is montycookgames.com. It's pricey, but it is, like I said, very interesting. You might be like me, where you bought it and then you sat on it for 2 years and have not played it until now. But if you're a world builder, it's a really fun read. But that is our show. We're going to be back next week with another episode of the Saturday Morning D&D Show. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.